Hello and welcome to Planet Critical, the podcast for a world in crisis. My name is Rachel Donald. I'm a climate corruption journalist and your host. Every week I interview experts who are battling to save our planet. My guests are economists, scientists, politicians, academics, and activists. They explain the complexities of the energy, economic, ecological, and political crises that we face today, and they reveal their solutions to mitigate the damage to our future. This is a critical time for our planet. It demands critical thinking. Click the subscribe button now and go to planetcritical.com to learn more. My guest this week is Mike Joy, who is a freshwater ecologist, and we had a wonderful, far-reaching conversation that ranged from how the dairy industry in New Zealand is impacting the rates of colon cancer in the country, to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, to energy consumption, to political power structures. Just one of these types of conversations that frequently crop up on the podcast. What I particularly enjoyed in this conversation is that, certainly in the first half, Mike lays out this systemic links between how industries are impacting human health. He also touches on the fact that human health and planetary health are inherently linked, i.e. that which is good for the natural world is also good for us. And then we sort of get into talking about, well, what does a good life look for human beings? How do we galvanize movements around that? How do we communicate it? And how can we very specifically target the industries and the people that are causing much of the crises around the world, rather than arbitrarily and sometimes abstractly blaming concepts for the situation that we find ourselves in today? There's so many nuggets of gold in this episode. I really hope you all enjoy it. If you do, please share it far and wide. If you love the episode, support the podcast at planetcritical.com or on Patreon. Becoming a paid subscriber or patron also supports my independent investigations into climate corruption around the world. I expose dangerous industry greenwashing and the world's worst climate fraudsters. If that's important to you, join the Planet Critical community who help make that happen. The link is in the description box below. And to those of you who are already supporting this podcast and my work, thank you so much. I think first things first, congratulations to your neighbours on a leftist win in the Australian election.
Yeah. I kind of, I'm a bit kind of worn out with this whole political system, because we ended up with a Labor government and a Labor Green coalition, and then a Labor government with a woman prime minister, and everybody thought it was going to be fantastic, but they just seem to sell out. You know, it's a guaranteed heartbreak to support or to follow a politician. I've found, I've been burnt so many times, and they just seem to compromise. They've asked me to, the Green Party asked me to stand for Parliament, and there's no way I couldn't do the compromise that they have to do, So so that's, it probably looks great from over there, but it's not so good when you're here and you see what's going on,
Sure, but I'm starting to think more and more in terms of steps and processes. So I think
Yeah.
it is still important that we guard faith in what politics could be and support those that are making compromises, but they're making the kind of compromises that hopefully won't have to be made in 10 years if we keep pushing that kind of progressive agenda. You might think that's naive.
Yeah, could be a lot worse. That's the thing, I guess. They'll never be fast enough for me. So
Yeah, that I can understand. So Mike, give us some background about your work, and then hopefully a little bit more about your relationship with the New Zealand government. And we'll launch off and see where we go.
Okay, well, yeah. I'm a freshwater ecologist, but I didn't. Okay, I go back a bit further. I didn't start at university. I didn't even go walk through the door of a university until I was 33, 34 years old. So I had a whole life driving trucks and taxis and sailing around the Pacific and doing building work and, very practical kind of jobs. And then started at university late in life, and then just loved every second of it, and did a undergrad degree and then a master's and then a PhD. And then before I even finished my PhD, I started teaching. And it was just a slow kind of radicalization that happened over that time, I think, is kind of, well, we convinced ourselves and the rest of the world that we are clean and green here in New Zealand. And I kind of, so I grew up with this belief that I was so fortunate to be born in this country where, we're world leaders in sustainability, then only to find out that we're actually the opposite. We're really, really bad. And especially the last 3 decades, we've just gone really, really backwards, and so much harm being done to fresh water. Just like most wealthy countries, I guess, our per capita emissions are amongst the highest in the world, and our per capita use of fertilizer and marine captures and you name it, exploiting the environment. We're just so high up or so low in the rankings globally. So it was such a shock, and I guess that made me angry, because I had this expectation that was shattered, and so I became more and more outspoken about it. I guess, unlike most of my colleagues, I started writing op-eds in newspapers and things, and that led to me running up into trouble with the Prime Minister, and so, did you want to hear the story?
Yeah, we want to hear that
Yeah,
story.
okay. Well, I wrote this an op-ed for one of our biggest, the New Zealand Herald, and about how we kid ourselves about how well we are doing environmentally, and it got picked up by Hard Talk, BBC Hard Talk. Stephen Sackur was decided to use that information, and our Prime Minister John Key, this was quite a few years ago. He'd only been in the job a year, a real sort of right-wing businessman, leader of the National Party, was in the UK, and agreed to do an interview with Sackur, and Sackur tore shreds off him, but especially about this environmental stuff. And he famously, John Key, our Prime Minister, he was getting all this stuff quoted at him, but your leading environmental scientist, Mike Joy, says blah, blah, blah. And John Key says, well, it's just he's this one scientist's opinion. They're just like lawyers. You can always go get another opinion. And the other opinion has never come. And hilariously, even the lawyers were kind of upset about that. They didn't think that was right either. And so it kind of made me, I guess, famous or infamous overnight in New Zealand, having that played over and over again. And then I had this interesting situation where it felt like for weeks and weeks and weeks, when I was just getting talked about, nobody was actually talking to me. It was just all these things about, he said this and he thinks this, and so it was kind of a weird time. But I mean, it did raise my profile a bit and gave me the opportunity, I guess, to speak out even more about those issues. But it was really fresh water that started me along this path, and then not being able to just narrow down like lots of my colleagues can into just studying intensely some reductionist kind of I started working on native fish, actually, but that kind of narrowing down wasn't for me. I had to look at the causes of what was happening, and inevitably it becomes political, because there tend to be political decisions that allow these things to happen. So frustration with the failure to look after our environment.
So tell us what's going on then. What's happening to New Zealand's freshwaters?
Oh, well, so what happened is, it's kind of a long story, but we ended up industrializing farming here in a big way. So we kind of promote ourselves as really big in this grass-fed dairy. We actually are the biggest exporter of dairy in the world, New Zealand is.
What?
But yeah, we're the biggest exporter, but because most countries produce their own, their own consumption. Milk is produced locally, but we're the biggest exporter, because very little of what we produce is, maybe a few percent, not even 2% of it is drunk actually as milk. The rest of it, a chunk goes into, cheese and butter and that kind of thing. But the vast majority of it is dried and turned into milk powder, where it becomes exported and becomes a commodity. Most of it, it's very hard to trace, but most of it ends up in this classification of confectionery, which means it's a junk food filler. It's a cheap protein on a global market, a global commodity that ends up as coating on, all sorts of of junk food and junk food
Mm.
bars and all that kind of thing. And the other big use for it is as breast milk replacement, infant formula. It goes
Mm-hmm.
into that all over the world through
Mm-hmm.
some really big companies. So we produce a huge amount of milk from a little country, but most of it is dried and mostly using coal um, into
Oh,
a powder
interesting.
so that it can be exported. Because then you have the shelf life, and I mean, you're at the bottom of the world. It's very hard to trade in fresh, dairy products when you live there, and so
Mm-hmm.
so you've had this. There was a the government sort of took over, and we had one big dairy company and a dairy uh, legislation, which meant that this one dairy company had to take the deal was that if anyone started a dairy farm in New Zealand, this company had to take their milk. They were required to under law, and so to hedge that the threat of not being able to process that milk, every new shareholder, the shares went into buying drying infrastructure, and so now there's this huge amount of stainless steel drying capacity, as I said, mostly dried using coal, um, and we even import coal to do that. That means that we're kind of locked into this high production model, and so we
Mm.
put huge amounts of fertilizer on. We're also the biggest importer of palm kernel globally. No other
What
country
does that do?
import. So the palm, you would have heard of. I think you do some work around Malaysia and Indonesia where
Palm
the
oil,
big
yeah.
palm plantations are, and so after they do the processing to get the palm oil, there's this kernel. They call it palm kernel expeller. It's the kind of the kernel of the whatever it is they squeeze the oil out of,
Mm-hmm.
and we import it as stock food.
Okay.
So we feed it
Ah,
directly to cows. It's a very cheap food, and it's kind of also related to this other dumb thing we do, which is we grow Pinus radiata, Northern Hemisphere pine, in plantations here, and we export whole logs. And so these ships take, every port in the country has just got this massive area that's just logs as far as the eye can see, and we load them onto
yeah.
these ships to be processed offshore. But the backload for those ships is ideal to fill them up with palm kernel to bring it back again. So you get kind of, a cross subsidy between logs out and
Yeah.
palm kernel in. And so that this sort of artificially high intensity of cows, because nitrate fertilizer, a quarter of it coming from local gas that's turned into urea ammonia fertilizer, and three-quarters of it is imported from the Middle East. And so that cranks up the intensity of dairy farming, and it's kind of counterintuitive, but the biggest problem is actually the cow's urine. So
Mm-hmm.
the nitrate goes onto the grass and grows the grass. The cows eat the grass, but very little of that nitrogen goes out in the milk. So the rest of it's excreted through urine. And if you or any of the listeners have seen a cow urinate, you know that it's kind of just this big dump of high volume over a very small area, and it's just almost pure nitrogen. And
Mm-hmm.
because it's not spread out, because it just lands in one spot, then the grass can't take it up and it just moves down. It's very mobile nitrate in the
Mm-hmm.
soil, and it moves down through the soil and into groundwater, and then makes its way into our streams, into our aquifers and lakes and rivers and the ocean. And so we pour huge amounts of the stuff on the land, and then it's just building up and building up in our groundwater and rivers, and then it has these kind of secondary effects, and people, I guess, are aware of dead zones off the coast of like off the Mississippi and places like that, where you get oxygen depletion happening in the ocean. We have
Mm-hmm.
it happening
Mm-hmm.
in our rivers and lakes as well. So you get algal blooms, and you start to get big oxygen fluctuations day and night with the photosynthesizing algae, and so it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
secondary effects of the nitrogen, although it is its own toxic issues. And then I guess the other component of that is we've now got the realization that was emerging science all over the world, but here as well, that quite low levels of nitrogen in drinking water are associated with cancers and some birth defects as well. And
Oh,
so
really?
and I think there's only been, I mean, the Danes have done quite a bit of work because they have a big database there. So they've done the work. The World Health Organization, and it's the UK limit, and most countries in the world work on this 11 or around between 10 and 11 milligrams of nitrate nitrogen per liter of
How
water.
many?
It is 10 is the limit,
Right.
and it's because of the blue baby syndrome. Have you heard of this blue
What's that?
baby syndrome
No,
before?
no.
No, it's that first few months when a baby's born and it's adapting to its own oxygen rather than its mother's oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
It's susceptible to nitrate in water because it will bind instead of hemoglobin. And so the blue baby thing is the blue lips that you get, when a human's low on oxygen, their lips turn blue
Mm-hmm.
first, is the first sign. So that's where it comes from. But it's 70-year-old science, and it turns out that this association with cancer is at 10 times less than that. So around 1 milligram is the level in a bunch of studies in the States and Denmark and other parts of Europe, where you start having an increased risk of colon cancer,
Mm-hmm.
and at similar levels, birth defects, premature births, and that kind of thing happen at that level of nitrate.
So, how much nitrate is there in water, generally speaking? I mean, do you have data on that
Oh,
for New
and
Zealand?
natural, yeah, naturally in our groundwaters was barely detectable.
Oh,
So
I'm
we've
sure
got,
naturally, because
yes,
these
yes.
things
Oh
do
no, so
tend to work
now,
like that. But now,
okay, so the big paper that we published just last year, we got hold of all the data. Well, our student did, for 4 million. There's 5 million people in New Zealand, and we got data on the drinking water for 4 million of them. And
hmm
of those 4 million, 800,000 receive drinking water that exceeds that 1 milligram number.
by
So
how
right up
much?
to, by lots in places. Just it's like a bell curve with a tail of low, and then it just gets high. There's a few that are very, very high. Most people it's
Can
not
you
far above that,
give a
but
number?
everywhere it's increasing. So there's a lag time from what you do on the land till it ends up in the water,
hmm
and so it's been increasing for 30 years now, and it continues to increase, and will do. Even if we
But
stop farming tomorrow, we'll still keep.
what was the number at the
Well,
top
we've
of the
got
bell
some.
curve?
60 milligrams, more than 60 milligrams
16?
in some drinking water. 60.
60?
And so,
And the
yeah,
safe level
yeah,
is 1?
around one. It's 0.87 gave a 15% increase. No, sorry, 0.87 gave a significant increase in the big, multi-million person study in Denmark. And then when you get to 2.1, you have a 15% increase in the risk of colon cancer, and it just goes up like 5% risk for every milligram after that.
Oh my God. And
Mm,
do you have the data on colon cancer in the areas where it is 60 milligrams per
yeah,
liter? Did you
yeah. We
cross-reference that?
don't have. We can, but only very, very roughly, and we have a big research bid in to do more studies. But New Zealand
Okay.
has the highest rates of colorectal cancer in the world, and
Well, there you
we
go.
only had the data by by we have district health boards. So these are, sort of like regions. There's about 10 of them in the country, and we only have the cancer rates for those big areas. And there was definitely a
Yeah.
relationship with intensity of farming and groundwater nitrate and colorectal cancer, but we couldn't. The trouble is, it's like smoking and lung cancer. You still can't prove, if somebody smokes all their life and then they get lung cancer, you can't prove that it was the cigarettes that do it. And in the same way,
Mm.
you sort of have to have these correlative studies, and they're so easy for the industry to attack the studies because they say, oh, well, but there's all these other factors and things that go on, but and undoubtedly there is, and you can't take 1,000 people, and have half of them have nitrate in drinking water and half not, and see what happens. And
Mm.
their
Yeah.
lifetime accumulation rates as well. So it's very hard to prove. You can only do these kind of big population studies and just hope that people will take a precautionary approach. But to me,
What is the precaution?
it's
Sorry.
well, to not use nitrogen fertilizer. I mean, that's what I was coming to.
Right.
It's like carbon in the atmosphere. We as in humans now produce artificially more nitrogen than all of the natural systems put together. So it was
Oh.
discovered in the 1920s and 30s. It was actually they were looking at a way of getting nitrogen to make munitions, make bombs, but the Haber Bosch method, these two German guys found a way to use natural gas to take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and make it into a reactive nitrogen form. And so once we started that, we went along that same path as using, hydrocarbons for energy. We used them for making nitrogen fertilizer. And it was a big part of the green revolution was this, artificial synthetic nitrogen. And so we've grossly altered, the amount of nitrogen that's in flux in freshwater systems. And so just like with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, something that seemed like a really good idea at the time, suddenly, later on you realize that there's no free lunch and there's a downside to this. And what's really interesting for me as an ecologist is how similar the levels that start to cause ecosystem problems are to the human health limits. So we've
Mm-hmm.
done a bunch of work on the sort of tipping points for freshwater ecological problems, and they're very much around that 1 milligram as well. And maybe it's not coincidental that biological systems flip, whether it's inside humans or outside in freshwater ecosystems. So, and it's interesting for me for decades fighting to save rivers, for it to turn out to be a very similar level that protects human health.
Mm.
And me thinking, when we first discovered this is, wow, this will be it. Once, people are scared of cancer and, naturally, and this should change everything. But there's no sign of that happening. Even in Denmark, where they've done this really intensive study, the Danish government won't change their drinking water standards. So if so it's another one of these things. It's like the industries have so much power and trying to shift it, and people are
Mm.
so many people's jobs, I guess, and incomes are tied up with being able to use artificial nitrogen that nobody wants to try, living without it. I mean, there's studies that show using with our current diets, the the estimate is that only 3 billion people could be fed without the synthetic nitrogen.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to kind of, and I'm sure that Jason Bradford talked about this with you as well, that's because our food system's so stupid at the moment. We waste half of it, and
Yeah.
we feed animals and that we don't need to, and I suspect a huge amount of nitrogen fertilizer goes into biofuels as well. And
Mm.
so, if people would only look properly at those biofuel subsidies and realize that they would be better off just taking the gas that they're using to make the fertilizer to grow the crops that they then turn into
Yeah.
biofuels. If they just went right back to the start, they'd be, the energy return on investment thing, that using fossil fuels to grow crops to replace
Yeah.
fossil fuels is just,
Yeah.
so
It's absolute
stupid.
madness. It's like the
Mm,
hydrogen
mm.
thing as well.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
And I did see in the New Zealand Herald recently, actually, that there was one lone journalist who like adequately explained the hydrogen problem and how it's bullshit. And I was
Mm,
very pleased to see that article coming out, even if it's on the other end of the world. But this
yeah.
all makes me think, I mean, what's amazing about the last, you know, 15 minutes of you speaking is that you have
Mhm,
laid out the step by step of a systemic problem, from the kind of the crops that we eat and the food that we eat and how that's affecting, human health and the rivers and how it is all connected. And the thing that it makes me think is increasingly and increasingly as I do this podcast is like the climate crisis is very much a political crisis.
Mm,
And what do we do? How do we communicate all of this information to a public so that they can either, I don't know, form new political parties or vote in different kinds of people? Um, because and is it too much information to feed the public as well, in a sense? Like, how do we construct
mm,
a narrative or construct a truth that portrays the extent of the climate crisis and the political crisis and what's not being done that isn't, say, overwhelming or doesn't get mired down in the details that tend to mire academics down into these little atomized silos, as you were speaking of at the beginning?
mm. Yeah, oh, I think that part of the problem too is not just it's that siloing of, like we have a climate commission and we have, we silo climate, and it's so frustrating that climate is just a symptom, as we both know, of a
Yeah.
of a whole lot of crises that are happening, but it's sort of the one that gets the most, and what gets lost in that, in the nitrogen intensive farming story in New Zealand is a really, really good example of it, where there are multiple impacts of intensive farming. So greenhouse gas emissions, half of New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions come from biogenic methane. And so,
Mm.
all those cows are actually, a big problem for our greenhouse gas emissions as well. And what the government does is, the Climate Commission says we need to do something. Let's come up with some they want to come up with a technical fix for the methane emissions. And so they've got ideas around gene editing and
Oh,
things
come
that can be put
on.
in. No, yeah, seriously. But the thing is that they want to fix the methane issue, right? And yet, if we say cut the number of cows, we fix a whole bunch of issues. And that's the thing that, the same with the climate is there's so many things that, go together that if we just pick them off, my feeling is if we just talk about climate and we try to find a fix for climate and we do, work in that area, we forget or we don't think about the multiple gains. And if you
Mm.
just pick on one thing at a time, it seems impossible. But if you talk about all of the gains, human health and, social well-being and all of these other things that are all interconnected, and how much our lives could be better. I guess it's an advantage too, in a way for me seeing this as an old man, because I know that in my lifetime per capita energy use has doubled, and so if somebody says to a young person, well, you have to halve your energy use, well, then it seems like the end of the world. But I only have to go back to my youth to know what the world was like when we had half the per capita energy use that we do at the moment. And I know you tend to we tend to romanticize the past, but
Mm.
I've talked to lots of friends who were around at the same time as me, and life wasn't so bad with a half the energy use. I can't see,
Mm.
there's nothing in my modern life that I see as a great advantage over, having all of this technology and energy consumptive things around me that we have now make my life any better. In fact, the opposite, I think. And so, it's that kind of trying to envisage a future that's different when it's all you know. Actually, I want to try this little analogy on you. This idea that I read about in a different topic, but made me think. Apparently, I haven't done a lot of research into it, but apparently in Egypt, the three big pyramids were built. It took about 3 or 4 generations to build those pyramids, and I imagine myself as or anyone alive today, imagine being around in the generation around the time that they decided not to build any more pyramids. Because apparently the whole economy was building pyramids. Everyone you knew, made ropes or made rollers or were involved in some way in building pyramids. And all your parents ever knew and all your grandparents ever knew was building pyramids,
Mm.
right? And you get to the end, and I don't know what it was that made them decide they'd had enough pyramids and they weren't going to build anymore. But I can picture, being at that time, and it's like, but how can you have life without pyramids, without pyramid building? Because we don't know any other way of living without having pyramids being built. And I can
Mm.
see all around me, sky towers and skyscrapers that are our versions of pyramids, and we only ever know a life of building these things. And so we have to, I think it kind of makes it easier for me to think about it in that way, that there's all through human history, there has been times when things came to an end, and you can't imagine a future that's different from what you know, or it's very difficult to. Um, but 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 that's how we have to see the changes that we need to make, I think.
Do we know what happened to the Egyptian economy off the top of your head? What did they
No, I
transition to?
should look into that. I can't imagine that. I mean, it must have been. It's bizarre, isn't it? Because all of the effort that went into that, and then somebody must have looked back and gone, why are we doing this? What are these? Like I do now. I've got to that point where
Yeah.
it's like, why do we do this? What? I just you just work so hard to all your life to pay off something, people get trapped in the wealthy world that we live in. They get locked into
Mm,
these systems, and we can't see a way out of it because it's all we've ever known. And
mm.
maybe I wonder too if it's because, and I kind of try to figure out how come people don't have a problem with it. And I think about a time for me when I was a young researcher. I spent time, actually a summer, in the subantarctic islands. New Zealand has a couple of islands. This was Campbell Island, halfway to Antarctica, and I lived on an island with a couple of other researchers, and we had nothing. There was no power, no running water, just nothing, nothing, nothing. No planes fly over, no radio, no communications, no. Oh, I had a CD player. I had 3 CDs with music on them that I took down with me that kept going for most of the time that I was there because I had enough batteries. But I think that experience that maybe changes, and I've got this. You've seen a picture of this old 90-year-old sailboat that I've got as well. So I go to a really simple life for holidays and things, and actually most people I know, that's their idea of a holiday, is to get away from technology and lie on a beach or go, in the forest and go walking. And so somehow, where we need to be, there's much more simple, low tech, low energy lives that seem to scare so many people, the thought of it. Yet bizarrely, that's what they want to do when they have a chance to go on holiday and that kind of thing. Not everyone, I know.
Well,
Some people want to go shopping.
I think it's honestly, I think it's like we're veering into dangerous rhetoric here because there is
Mm,
much
mm,
about tech that is really, really important. Like whenever I start to get a little
yeah.
bit anti-tech in my head,
Mm,
I think of the medical industry. There is
mm,
so
mm,
much that we need to invest in. There is so much technology that is saving lives. We are an inherently sort of symbiotic species with our technology, and we
mm,
have been for millennia. And there's a lot of tech that should be celebrated. And personally, I'm very happy to live in a world where I have access to an entire encyclopedia of information on
mm.
the internet
But
constantly and to be
isn't
able to
that
connect
causing
with
lots of
people.
problems as well, though, that the internet knowledge, trying to sort out the real from the fake? And the other thing I wanted to say about that
Sure, but
medical stuff is how much of, like the colon cancer, for example, how much of it's created through this technology that we have as well. So we need the technology to have the medical systems and that, but huge increases in the problems that are caused by the technology, that it's like chasing your tail kind of thing.
But it's not caused by the technology. It's caused by the people that choose
Hmm.
to
Sure.
disseminate false information or hide research or refuse to
Mm,
change certain
mm,
standards and practices despite the information that we have and despite the fact that there's probably new technology that could do better because they're trying to protect their bottom
hmm.
line. Like I really
Yes, yes,
still
true.
see it as a problem of economy even with,
Mm,
yes, the internet is causing like a lot of mental health problems and Facebook and all this kind of stuff. It's because they're deliberately designing algorithms to addict
mm,
people, not because
true.
the internet is in itself an inherently bad thing. Like the reason that I really like to split hairs on this topic is because it's kind of easy to be scared of tech as somebody that used to be. When it's like, no, let's keep focus on it's the people in power. It's the
Mm, mm. Oh,
it's
yes.
the inequality of power and capital
Yes.
that is the problem.
Yes. 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 Yeah, no, that's true. I have to admit that's true.
I mean, I do absolutely agree with you that like a lower energy life could be hugely beneficial. And even if I had Richard Heinberg on discussing energy
Mm,
rationing, and I was like, oh, that is interesting. Imagine, afterwards for a few weeks, I was thinking about it. What would life look like if I had to ration my energy? Like, what would I use my rations on? Well, I would definitely use them on work for sure. And then what would happen if I
mm,
ran out at the end of the day? Well, I'd probably read a
mm.
book. I'd probably speak to
Yeah,
my community. I'd
exactly.
probably,
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
kinds of
Yeah.
things that I do still do, but not as much because
Mm.
there is a world of laziness available to me in a sense,
Yes,
which
yes,
I think is
yes.
exacerbated by a hyper-capitalist world where we're all sort of working ourselves to the bone endlessly,
Mm,
which is
mhm,
also in turn fueled by unlimited quote unquote energy. Um,
mm,
so I think it's very interesting, and a less tech world could be great, but only if it comes hand in hand with, you know, correcting the imbalances of power and capital that have made it thus.
mm. Well, I mean, that's an interesting kind of conclusion that I came and shocked myself with, I don't know, a year or two ago when I questioned, because of all these sort of alternative energy sources that we could have. And I kind of came to this amazing conclusion myself that, say we came up with some, carbon-free, endless energy source, um, would we be better off? And when I
Mm,
asked myself, then I just said, no, we wouldn't be, because what's allowing us to do all of the harm to the planet and destroy our futures is unlimited energy. And actually, the
mm,
only thing that will probably save us is running out of energy, or at least really cheap, free, or it's almost free fossil fuel energy that
interesting.
we have at the moment that's driven so much. And I could never have imagined myself thinking that, because I was always, like so many people who think about all we have to do is just stop using fossil fuels and replace it all with renewable and everything will be great. And we know how difficult or impossible that would be at anywhere near the lifestyles that we have at the moment, but that actually that might be the thing that saves us. Except
Mm,
the worry is that we won't accept that reality and we will destroy everything we have trying to replace fossil fuels. And that's like an even worse outcome in a way. It's hard to imagine
absolutely.
because because I think you touched on it with that laziness. I think I know myself where I'm inherently lazy. If there's an easy way of doing something, if there's a shortcut, if there's a powered version of something that I'm doing, well, I'll always it's kind of natural to us that we'll take that way, won't we? And I, I remember cracking up my office at the previous university was looked out on the gym car park, the gymnasium. And I used
Hmm.
to watch it in the evening, the fights and things that would happen over people trying to get the car park nearest to the gym door, so they didn't have to walk so far to go to the
Yeah,
gym. And it kind of sums
yeah.
up human nature, doesn't it? That we're all, if there's an easy way out, even though they were going to the gym to do exercise, they still didn't want to walk across the car park. And so it's we're our own worst enemies, I'm sure.
I think the other possible option that is really scary is that if we do get to a stage where um, the world powers finally understand that energy is limited, they will start to limit it for us and limit what
Mm,
energy can be invested in. Because if you, for
mhm,
me, I always look at, right, where's financial capital going? Because that is where energy
mhm.
would go. And I think of like the United
Yes.
Kingdom, which is like cutting, education, cutting the health service, cutting arts. I mean,
Mm.
local arts funding has just been on a massive decline for decades. In great comparison to France, they like funnel money into their arts.
Mm,
Um, and to me, what's frightening is, when I think of some of the great benefits of a fossil fuel economy, one of the things I think about is the press, the printing press, and books,
mm,
and
yeah.
how, we managed to create musical instruments with ease and artwork and all this kind of stuff and distribute
Mm,
words and imagination. And that's all fantastic. And you can guarantee that would be the first thing to go because everybody knows the arts
mm,
don't make money.
yeah.
And that's where I get frightened of if we do not fix the political structures that are at play here. I think it's less likely that the world is going to go up in flames, but rather every single option which we perceive as a luxury today, even though it's couched in complete misery and precarity, is going to be taken away from us. And it's going to be a very
Mm,
small group of people that make decisions on who we are, what we consume, what we have access to. And essentially, deliver us all into like climate serfdom. Um,
mm.
and that's going to be harder to get out of than a Mad Max anarchy thing. And I think far more
Yes,
likely.
yes. Have you read any of Charles Hall's stuff on energy return on investment? And I mean, it's really interesting because to me, because he started off doing his PhD and the same as me working on freshwater fish and their
Hmm.
migration. And he was the guy that first termed energy return on investment, as far as
Okay.
I know, because he was looking at these migrating fish and going, well, why are they migrating? What's the point? And he did an energy
Mm.
study and found that there was a EROI of 14. So for every unit of energy they spent migrating into the ocean biome, they gained 14 units. And that's exactly where I was working in my PhD initially as well. And then he talks about as energy return on investment starts to decline, and more energy has to go into getting the energy, then what that happens in an economy is that the discretionary chunk of the economy starts to get smaller and smaller and smaller as the energy return on investment declines. He's got these lovely graphics, and so the the
Can you define
discretionary.
discretionary?
Oh, so how much money's left over for fun things like the arts? And so he wrote a really cool paper with one of his students, and they looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs
Mm.
and sort of looked at what went first. And he found that what the indicator of a society that had plenty of discretionary energy, well, energy return on investment, was orchestras. So like if a country, if a I don't know how many orchestras that Scotland has, but the that's the indicator of how much sort of spare discretionary money there is, and as the
How
squeeze comes on, as the
fascinating.
energy return on investment starts to decline. There's an amazing book, Energy and the Wealth of Nations, that he wrote. It's one of those Springer books that's worth a fortune. Well, no, sorry, that costs a fortune, but as academics we can get access to them for next to nothing. But yeah, I mean that he just, and so they could see that that was the first sign of the decline, and it was exactly what you were hinting at. It's the good things that get taken away, the things that makes us happy, I guess, is the thing, is, and you gradually lose that those things. And then it was education. I think after that, you can kind of work your way down that this kind of hierarchy, and there are the things that start to disappear. And there's examples like with the Arab Spring and that kind of thing as well. As countries start to not have that discretionary money because the energy return on investment declines, you can see it happening.
What are we going to accept to go? I mean,
Mm,
is it going to be that, we accept that they cut our arts funding. We accept that they cut
mm,
our health budgets. We accept that they cut our education. What are we going to accept is what it's going to get to that first level, food and shelter.
mm,
And that's when we're like,
yeah.
oh, no, no, that's enough, actually. And it's utterly madness. And to me, even like Maslow's triangle hierarchy of needs is kind of misleading as well, because what is a world without art? What is a human
Mm,
society without literature?
yes,
We
yeah,
need
I
these
agree.
things.
Yeah.
These are
Mm,
these incredible things that, like, essentially it's the individuation of subjective experience that speaks to a collective understanding.
hmm
That's magic.
yes.
You know,
Yeah.
What else is
Yep.
there? Because right now we have a world that atomizes people into individuals to fulfill a collective action and alienate them from one another. And art, literature, these music, these are the things that manage to
Mhm.
express the very essence of what it is to experience being alive and speak to one another. These are the things that we need to be protecting.
Yes.
And I think the more that we let and we allow for this modern world to destabilize, denigrate, and disavow our need for music, art, literature, connection, then the closer we're going to come to falling into that kind of dystopia, which will essentially just be a, I don't know, jacked up version of what already exists.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, no, I agree, and it's those things that makes us human that are so
Yeah.
important to us. Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I was thinking about another experience that I had, worked in, had it in Romania for a while, and the people that I was working with, teaching and researching, Angela, her mum lived in the mountains in Romania, and we went to visit her, and she was in her yeah, she was late 60s at that age. She had never been to hospital in her life, never been to the dentist in her life. She had a bit of a
Mm,
stoop, like she was,
yeah.
but she'd lived on that same piece of land for that whole length of time, and they had amazing kind of, social structure with that village that she lived in. They shared a tractor between heaps of them, and it's just a kind of a lesson in what's really important in life and how we kind of can't imagine in our world of everything, how we can't imagine a life without it, and that we forget, I guess, lose touch. Certainly lose touch with nature and where our food comes from and all that kind of thing, which is really, really crucial to life, I think, and become like sort of disconnected and then a whole lot of other problems that flow from that. So yeah, it's not like there isn't examples of how we could and should live out there, but somehow, like you say, the governments that get taken over by big business and corporations and that kind of crazy drive for maximizing growth that
Mm.
lead us into this trap that we're in now, and it's very hard to see a way out of it.
I think also, in order to envision a way out of it, we need to
Mm,
be able to present people with like a scalable option. Because right now, I spoke to Walter Jean about regenerative agriculture. I spoke with Jason Bradford,
mm,
and they are doing incredible things to educate people on how soils work, how you can feed
yeah.
yourself and your community, for example. But and this is something that I've said, and I've had a couple of listeners like pull me up on it. But I stand by it. I don't want to be a farmer.
Hmm.
I don't. I
Yeah,
do not. That is
yeah.
not how I envision my life. I would like to be a part of a community where I could fulfill a function, where I could help, perhaps, but I do not want to be manning a farm for the rest of my life. I would like a scalable option of regenerative agriculture that shows me how we can make this work for a town, for example. Like, what are the other economic and energy systems that we need to put in place to support a regenerative agriculture project so that it can feed, 10, 20,000 people rather than 100, 200.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think Jason Bradford talked about this, about that switch in those primary jobs, the jobs that were,
Mm.
how it's
Yes.
completely reversed now, and so everyone's a barista or a car salesman or something now, and there's very, very few people producing the food. But I fear though, Rachel, that that's the reality of, if you take fossil fuels out of agriculture,
Mm,
then in food production, then you need to have a lot more people working in there to replace it.
mm,
Because I think we kind of vainly convinced ourselves as humans that this green revolution was all about how clever we are, when actually it
mm.
was just about the energy that went into it, and none of those so-called technologies or would exist without fossil fuels. So I mean, we've learned a lot about, but we've forgotten a lot about how to be at one with nature and to produce food and all that kind of thing. But I think, I can't remember his figures, but there was a few percent that were involved in tertiary jobs, and in previous pre-industrialization. So you could be
Mm.
one of the few percent who didn't have to work on the land. I understand. I mean, I really enjoy, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I've never had to have backbreaking work out on the land, but there is so much to be said. I was a dairy farmer here for a year, and it was
Mm.
pretty low tech, low input, and it was pretty neat kind of lifestyle to be kind of closer to the land. And yeah, I mean, and people like Jason, and the sort of connections and how he sees how much other people enjoy it too. But I know it's
Mm.
not for everyone. But
Well, I
it
think
could.
I think what's important is that part of that vision needs to be that scalability in terms of
Mm,
it's not going to be groups of 100 each living in very, very tight, small,
yes.
fearful communities that have the burden
Mm,
of looking after one another intimately. Like if we can
mm,
scale
mm,
that so that it is a small town that is working collectively to look after one another, and then that burden of responsibility is shared as well, and then it would allow for
yeah.
more people to have more time to do different kinds of things and co-create a community that isn't just based on food production. Because the thing is, that's
Hmm.
not a vision that you can sell unless it's to people that are like, no,
Yeah, right.
I really like to do this already,
Yes, yes, I get what you're saying. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
something to mull over. If anybody can think of it,
Yeah,
let us know.
yeah. I think about this book. It's called An Island to Oneself, and it's about a Kiwi guy who in the 50s had this dream of living on an island, and he by himself, and he actually found one. It's called Saguaro, and it's an island that belongs to Rarotonga, and he managed to get a trading ship to drop him off there with a few supplies. And there was an old World War II, um, you know, hut that was on this island, and he wrote this book about his experience there, and it was amazing. And what amazed me was that so he's living by himself. He's in one of the most productive parts of the world. The reef's just and right outside his door is full of fish. There's seabirds. There's all manner of life to feed himself with. He bought seeds and things with him, and he created a garden. But the reality was that after a couple of years, he spent virtually all his days building, making gardens, shoring up his house that he lived in. It was actually a full-time job for an individual. Sort of people think about this, a desert island thing where you lie around reading books and stuff. It was actually a full-time job, and some real amazing
Mm.
lessons. He took tomato plants with him, and he planted them in his garden that took him ages to build because he had to cart soil from somewhere else. And these tomato plants grew amazingly, but there was no fruit because there were no pollinators there. And so his first year's
Of
crop of
course.
tomatoes, there wasn't a single fruit set on it. And these kind of lessons. But I mean, I guess that's the opposite of community, in that if you're trying to do
Mm.
it by yourself, it's a well, I mean, if he struggled to do it in the most productive kind of biome in the world, then in somewhere like like Scotland, if you were trying to do it by yourself, I can't imagine you would live for very long at all. So you need that community, and
Yeah.
it's just the size of the community that is what is different, I guess, in how different people envisage it. And I've got a feeling that around 100 was kind of an ideal size. I'm not
Mm.
talking about warring and fighting and all that kind of thing. But maybe at that kind of number, you can all be connected and know each other, and know what your different roles are and things.
I
And maybe if
think
it
I
gets too
think
much bigger than that, you lose that.
I think I've read that we can have 200 close connections. Like our brain is
Hmm.
built to
Hmm.
recognize and to have relationships with maximum 200 people. And that's
Yep.
from, the bygone tribal era. I
Yeah,
believe
that
that
certainly seems to be my
that's a true
limit.
statistic.
I can't, so I just can't remember people's names and things after that. Yeah, yeah.
But still, I think, and maybe this is a hangover from having existed only in a modern world. Although, do you know what? No, I'm gonna come out with it. I've lived in a teeny tiny village that had, 200 French people in it. I've lived in the biggest
Hmm.
capital in Europe. I've,
Hmm.
tried to find different ways and explore different ways of living. And I agree that finding a community is so key, and even doing it in a big space, in a great big capital, carving out the people that you know is crucial, and helping one
Hmm.
another.
Hmm.
But nonetheless, to me, part of the joy of existing is happenstance. Seeing something surprising, coming across somebody new, having a conversation, even just for 5 minutes, and then parting ways, which is something that can only happen once you get up to these bigger numbers. Walking down the
Yeah.
street and seeing a piece of art, scrawled on a wall, and not knowing where it comes from, but having it speak to you. Like, I I
Hmm.
just think that there is a lot still about this modern world that ought to be celebrated. And if we don't start to celebrate the correct things, then they will be the first to be lost, because they are not celebrated by those who currently make the rules. Um,
Mm.
I think,
Yeah, that's a
we
really
have to
good
be
point. I hadn't
so,
thought about it. Yeah.
I just think we have to be so clear with our targets.
Mm. No, that's true.
Nice note to end on.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of gone everywhere, hasn't it? But
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of. I mean, I think you're going to reach this point where you've had all of these experts from around the world on and covered everything that you can possibly cover, maybe, um, then I guess it's trying to figure out how we're going to make this change. How's it going to come about? It just seems like we talk about it and we know about it, but it seems even less likely that we're going to make the right decisions, or that governments are. That this sort of three options that I see for the future, and there's business as usual, and we just kill ourselves, trying to maintain this growth until we've destroyed everything. There's a kind of the green growth model, which seems to be what a lot of people kind of imagine, that we will just seamlessly transition into this renewable world. And because they see all the hype, the stories online about hydrogen and hydrogen
Mm.
planes and battery this, and the whole world will just carry on as it is, and we'll just switch to renewables. And then there's the kind and to me that's a nightmare outcome as well, because we'll just destroy everything we have trying to maintain what we have, by
Yeah.
switching to renewables, from going with this incredibly energy dense, one-off sort of legacy that we got from the past. And if we try to maintain our current lifestyles in the wealthy West, then we will end up destroying everything, and it'll be just as nightmarish as business as usual. So the third option is the only viable one, and that is ecologically sustainable. Start. I was just thinking, because here in New Zealand, I don't know where it is in the UK, but our Earth Overshoot Day was three
Mm.
last month. It was the 19th of April, and on the
Yeah.
19th of April in New Zealand, we went into overshoot, and went. So
Yeah.
we every day now we're in ecological debt, and so we got to come back a long, long way to get that balance, and that's the only option for us, is this, living within, um, these boundaries of one planet. And the only way that's going to happen is through degrowth, and whatever kind of word you want to put on it. But we have to stop growing, and we have to massively decrease what we consume and what we do. And so there's I just see that if you cut it down, there's just three possibilities here, um, and it's hard. It just doesn't seem to be any sign of the business as usual, and maybe a combination of business as usual, which is just green business as usual. Dressed up as green. It's not actually green. It's just this imaginary green, because it's just as destructive, and it involves it involves more fossil fuels to create the kind of infrastructure that people imagine that we're going to have. So, which really leaves just one, and that is, that kind of living within the boundaries and massively decreasing. And it's really hard to imagine how that's going to come about, because any government that talked about it would be gone. They're not going to get the votes. It's a popularity contest, and so I don't know. Do you see a way that would actually happen?
Yes, actually. Yes. I think I think you have to zoom out a little bit and start asking different questions, because how do we make that impossible thing happen? Well, it's an impossible thing, right? So what other questions can we ask to that space to promote different answers? And one of the things that I started asking myself a few months ago was, how do we get people excited about politics again?
Mm-hmm.
How do we change the paradigm of what what politics is, or what politicians do, or what they're capable of? Because if you get people excited about politics again, if you galvanize a new movement and you present an entirely new option that people can thus have hope in. It's like I had a literary agent say to me a few months ago, the first book is always the most important, the debut, because nobody has anything bad to say. It's pure hope. So it's like, in order to create pure hope, you need to present something entirely new. So what I think needs to happen is if looking at this part of the world, a pan-European Green Party. Now, there's structures that are already in place, like Democracy in Europe 25 or Party of the European Left. I think what needs to happen is Spain, France, Italy, Denmark, Finland, the UK, everywhere there needs to be a party that comes forward and say, we are a European party. We have national chapters. We have policies that are particular to our national needs on certain things, but we have one climate manifesto.
Mm-hmm.
And we have one energy manifesto. And we have one X manifesto. And that is going to grease the wheels in the European Parliament. Here is what we could achieve in like 1 year if we were all voted in. So that to me is a question with a response.
Yeah.
How do you get people excited? And thus, how would that then enable political action? So I think it needs to be, in terms of envisioning a new future, it's like we need to be asking certain questions about that reveal the possibilities of new futures. And we need to get people excited, and we need to address those in the middle, really. I don't know. Now my train of thought's going away.
But I think that's I can imagine that it's like the world's waiting for somebody to lead the way, and I think if Europe did it, once there was a kind of a leader for the rest of the world to follow, I think it would happen. People are kind of. I get the feeling that people know that we're in deep, deep trouble, and they're looking for somebody to show. And then once it started, it would be a roller coaster, and everybody would, there would be quickly be movement in that direction. It's just it's that getting it someone to fire it off in the first place, someone to be brave. Because the only one that seems to get held up as a model is Cuba, and that was because it kind of was forced on them, and it'd be much better to have one that was led rather than forced, and that people could then get excited about and follow.
Yeah. And I think we need to start taking civilian action as well. One of the things that I've been thinking about, I don't know if I should say this on the pod. I'm going to. I want to put on the real COP. On the anniversary this year of COP26, I want to put on the real COP with like leftist politicians, world experts, activists, civilians, business leaders who are aware of the problem and actually talk solutions, real solutions, gritty solutions, troubleshoot each other, create networks, create relationships, envision a new future together, co-create it, publicize the hell out of it. And show the public around the world, people are doing something. It's not a lost cause. That's my big goal for 2022. So if anybody has money,
I love the idea of it, because I don't want to have to glue myself to door handles, which is
Mm.
because of that scientist protest. Um, I've had people approach me saying, are you going to do that here in New Zealand? I'm not that brave to kind of do. I'm not the sort of person that does that kind of thing. So I want your I want your real COP to happen, and for scientists to be involved in that rather than having to glue
Yeah.
themselves or chain themselves to railroad tracks or anything like that. So
Yeah.
I'm too chicken
Yeah.
for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's the big goal, frankly, for the end of this year.
Yeah.
I think everybody is waiting for the trigger to be pulled somewhere, and
Hmm.
recently I'm kind of over waiting. I'm
Yes.
gonna pull as many as I can, and I think I'm in a really fortunate position where it has nothing to do with me. I'm not an expert on anything. But one thing
Yeah,
I
but
can
that's
do
a
is get
great
people in a
place to
room.
be, though. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, because there's too, yeah, like, I mean, you know this, that the people, it's too reductionist. The system is set up that nobody's kind of
Hmm.
having that overview. And I guess that's the kind of people that you've had on your podcast have been the people who can see the bigger picture. And then
Yeah.
it's, yeah, that's the secret to understanding our predicament and to be able to change it is being able to bring it all together. Yeah.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Mm.
We can make it happen.
Sounds great. Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
listen,
I'll be there.
Mike, thank you so much for your time. It was such a pleasure speaking with you. My final question, as always, is who would you like to platform?
Um, I don't know. It's hard, isn't it? Because you kind of end up. I don't want to suggest somebody who's already doing or in my world, but talking to the same place.
Well,
But
to
Jack
be
Santa
honest, I don't
Barbara.
Jack Santa Barbara because I don't have a lot
Yeah.
of water talk on this podcast, and I think it's
Oh, okay.
actually a
No,
component that's
this
missing.
isn't. Yeah. No, I don't know any watery people, but Jack's kind of across this and trying to get degrowth to happen here, and
Okay.
he has amazing connections all around the world, and um, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I just worry that it's kind of more of the same, and we have some amazing Indigenous leaders here that could be really interesting to
Yeah,
have a different
definitely.
view. Kind of. So can I throw in one more? And
Please.
as an Indigenous woman here who's really powerful and making a difference in her community and on the world stage, and that's is Tina Nata. And I can give you contact details for her, but
Fantastic.
yeah, she's an inspirational Maori woman who's taken on the government here and with without being associating with any political party, but really trying to make a difference.
Awesome. I would love an introduction to her. Thank you so much. And
Mm,
thank you for your
yeah,
time. It was great
cool.
speaking with you.
Thanks, Rachel. It was fun. See ya.
If you want to learn more about Mike's work, I've put links in the description box below. Remember to subscribe to this channel if you're new here and share the episode if you enjoyed it. If you loved it, support Planet Critical on Patreon. The link is also in the description box below. Supporting the podcast also directly supports my climate corruption investigations, so a huge thank you to the community who make all of this work possible. Thank you all for listening. See you next week.